a top story which is coming in right now. We'll be debating this later on with our editor-in-chief, Arnab Goswami, later in the day. However, it's not just Indigo operating Turkish leased aircraft. It's also SpiceJet. That is right. Big update coming in on Republic TV. Not just Indigo, even SpiceJet operating Turkish planes on Indian soil. SpiceJet has secured clearance to lease 5 Boeing 737 aircraft from a Malta-based subsidiary of Turkish operator Corendon Airlines. Although the subsidiary operator under a separate license, it's wholly owned by the Turkish parent. Huge updates coming in, viewers, on Republic TV. And we're getting you all these updates coming in. SpiceJet also operating Turkish planes. This is very concerning. Both Indigo and SpiceJet are currently operating aircraft leased from Turkish operators and with Turkish crew under DGCA approved arrangements. Indigo has received a third extension from DGCA to continue on leasing 2 Boeing 777-300ER aircraft along with crew from Turkish Airlines. This is called a damp lease arrangement. A damp lease arrangement where the aircraft and pilots are provided by the foreign airline. Let's go straight across to Shravan, who's joining us live. Shravan, very, very concerning. And the reason we are highlighting this is because it was Turkey who was openly backing Pakistan post-Operation Sindoor.
Well, in fact, the airline says it is purely from the business standpoint, and given the fact that this is at a time when they face a massive shortage of aircraft. In fact, what is interesting is that after there was a ban that was basically put into place, you've had Indigo making this request before the DGCA that they want a one-time extension of the lease. In fact, this lease is a damn wet lease that was essentially taken by Indigo, which essentially means that they not only take the aircraft but also the crew. Now, this time it was with the Malta-based subsidiary of Turkish Airlines, that's the Corendon Airlines, and 2 Boeing 777 was taken as on lease, and not just Indigo. Interestingly, you have SpiceJet also going ahead with a wet lease agreement with Corendon Airlines, which essentially means that a Turkish aircraft would be flying on domestic routes in India. In fact, multiple routes from Kolkata, Surat, Ahmedabad, in fact, in Maharashtra, as well as in Karnataka. These are routes that have been flown by Corendon Airlines itself. Now, what are the national security implications here? Of course, at a time when you have essentially seen what you've already pointed out a short while back, Turkey's role, particularly during Operation Sindoor, and top generals have already pointed out the role that Turkey has essentially played in supplying drones to Pakistan. It has been a cause of concern. Now, for the airlines, they essentially said that this is purely from the business standpoint, and it is also with regards to the code sharing that they have had with Turkey, keeping in mind that part of the global passenger volume that is handled from Istanbul itself, it is impossible for Indigo to really carry out this kind of an operation if at all they do not go into some sort of an agreement with Turkish Airlines. Similarly, this is the case for SpiceJet also. Now, what is important to highlight is the role of the DGCA itself. If at all the agreement had lapsed in the month of May, why exactly did DGCA really go ahead and give the airline perhaps a free hand as far as operations, as far as the Turkish airline operations are concerned? And why exactly looking into only the concerns of one airline, that is Indigo? The very fact that Indigo has been arguing that they are unable to carry out any further operations if they do not get help, adequate help from the Turkish Airlines, they will not be able to match up to the volume of passengers flying to Turkey and then, of course, onward a journey to Europe as well as North America.
That's right. And Shravan, this is also happening in something called a damp lease agreement. If you could help our viewers understand, what exactly does this really mean, a damp lease agreement?
Well, in this kind of an agreement, you not only are in a position to use their aircraft, but also crew members. So effectively, on your domestic route, you would have Turkish crew members catering to the needs of the passengers. That's the kind of lease agreement that you're looking at. This is not a dry agreement that has been signed with the Turkish airline. And in fact, Corendon Airlines actually happens to be a subsidiary of Turkish Airlines, which is based out of Malta, effectively owned by Turkish Airlines itself. And not just Corendon Airlines. What I'm also picking up is that Indigo is already in a final stage of another agreement to be signed with another airline, and it happens to be a Turkish airline itself. So we are trying to get in more details on the fact that how exactly is Indigo essentially going ahead with the kind of agreements that they are trying to sign with the foreign carriers at this point in time. Now, from the airline standpoint, remember, it's important to highlight that they're essentially saying that this is purely from the business standpoint and not from the national security standpoint. But can the DGCA really come clean on this entire matter as to why was a one-time extension actually given to Indigo Airlines? On what grounds were they really given? These are some questions that remain completely unanswered from the DGCA at this stage.
Yes. And just putting on those pictures, exclusive pictures coming in Republic TV from Jabalpur Airport, Shravan. So this is SpiceJet has leased 5 Boeing aircraft from the Turkish airline Corendon Airlines. So that you can see that written there very clearly, which is a Turkey-based operator, like you were saying, Shravan. But, you know, these arrangements have been cleared by the DGCA even after Operation Sindoor, which was India's counter-terror operations. When will DGCA ask these airlines to wind up these arrangements?
Well, in fact, that hasn't really happened so far, and there is no response really coming in from the DGCA as to by when can this arrangement really come to an end, and whether at all it is possible to begin with. Because for the airlines, they have essentially said that if at all international operations are to be carried out, then they will have to have code-share agreement with foreign carriers. And in this particular case, because there is a large volume of passengers traveling to Turkey and thereafter to Europe and North America, Istanbul happens to be the transit hub. And that is the reason why most of these airlines are essentially going in with agreement with foreign carriers so that they can handle the passenger volume till about, at least till about Istanbul. And this kind of an agreement is also signed with Qatar as well as Norwegian Airlines, because these are airlines which have essentially supported providing their own aircraft to Indian airline carriers. In fact, this is a global practice. But having said that, remember, these are changing. These are different times that we are living in right now, particularly post Operation Sindoor, where there has been a national security concern of how exactly Turkey has supported Pakistan. The question is about the cargo services. And the very fact that when these airlines essentially go in for refurbishing or for that matter some sort of a servicing, they're essentially going back to Turkey. What are the implications of it, at least as far as operations on our own Indian soil is concerned? That remains a cause of concern. That is where the DGCA had to basically step in post-Operation Sindoor, asking the airlines to cease these agreements. But despite that, in the month of September, we are talking about the last extension that actually came in for Indigo Airlines was in the month of September itself.
That's right. Well, Shravan, we are showing our viewers these exclusive pictures from Chennai Airport and Jabalpur Airport. Both pictures are showing how both Indigo and SpiceJet are relying on a foreign airline, that too Turkish Airlines, Turkish aircrafts. Speaking of which, Shravan, also this is raising questions about dependence, especially on Turkish planes. Shravan.
I'm sorry, I couldn't get your question here.
Yes, Shravan. So we're putting these pictures out for our viewers. Corendon Airlines, which are on lease to Indigo and SpiceJet. And the other question, of course, that we are raising right now, which is concerning, is dependence on foreign airlines, that too Turkish planes.
Well, there are two arguments to it. One, if you go by the argument put forth by the airlines, they essentially say this is purely from the business standpoint and they are unable to carry on international in fact, operations unless they get into some sort of a code-share agreement with foreign carriers. They're also highlighting the fact that post the pandemic, there has been a massive shortage of supply of aircraft, despite that they have essentially put across several attempts to, increase their supply chain. That hasn't really happened so far. And the difficulty that they've essentially faced is that despite the supply shortage, they've increased the routes in which they're operating. So the question that goes to the airlines is that why exactly would you really go in for this kind of an expansion when you are unable to perhaps augment the aircraft supply itself, and they're essentially depending on foreign airlines. It's quite different in the case of Air India here, because Air India has largely got into code-share agreement, but these leasing of aircraft that you're talking about aren't essentially from countries like Turkey.
Right. And even though, like we said, this is so-called a temporary measure which is being taken, Shravan, but the question of national interest also comes up. I mean, national interest should be coming first, Shravan.
Well, in fact, let me just bring in Vipul Saxena, aviation expert joining us on this broadcast. Mr. Saxena, if you go by the argument that has been put by the airline, they are saying that this is from the business standpoint. In fact, they are saying that you need to open up the market. But there is an issue here. The issue is with whom are you signing this agreement? An enemy country. So somewhere down the line, if tomorrow a situation actually comes up, can you really sign an agreement with countries like Pakistan as well as Bangladesh? Not that they are in any position to provide us with any aircraft, because they are unable to even carry on with their own operation. But just for the argument's sake, can you really sign an agreement with a country who is actively participating in supporting our enemy nation?
Not at all, because nation comes first above everything. Second thing, there's something called security clearances. And when in September this issue was raised about Indigo made a special request that since we have an agreement, we would like to seek 6 months time frame to conclude this. And 6 months, more than 6 months now it's getting over. And I think it's time when Indigo should conclude their agreement. And also SpiceJet is a really surprise came to me. After Indigo's issue, why SpiceJet automatically did not initiate such action. So I think things are being taken too lightly by the airlines whenever it comes to any kind of orders or any kind of regulations of DGCA or Minister of Civil Aviation. I think somewhere IB should also come into action and take some action against this. The security clearance of directors should be suspended till the time this issue is closed. Then only these people will get some lesson.
But Mr. Saxena, we are talking about national security concerns. But is there anything wrong if an airline actually signs an agreement, because they say that you cannot otherwise really operate in today's situation, because you do not have enough number of aircraft, there isn't enough number of supply of aircraft, especially post the pandemic. They've placed the orders, but that isn't really enough. Where exactly are the airlines really going wrong in their thought process?
See, because this is an enemy country. An enemy country can do any kind of sabotage. They may set suicide bomber, they may put bombs there. They may do anything, any kind of threat to the aircraft. Who will be responsible? For the business interests, we cannot keep national interest and national security on the sides. The first priority and first responsibility of any business entity is national security and national safety. And that is why there is a clause. If they say that because there is an agreement of long term and all that, but every agreement has a clause of force majeure. Force majeure talks about this only any kind of situation which is beyond control of any legal framework or any of these signatories. That is called force majeure. Under force majeure, there is no case can be filed, there is no compensation can be asked. So under that clause, government should ask both the airlines to immediately terminate this contract, and Indian Air Force should stop giving ADC clearances to this aircraft which are from Turkey agreement.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Saxena, for joining us on this broadcast and putting this into perspective. It is quite essential to basically focus on what aviation expert Mr. Saxena had to point out, that it is, after all, the responsibility of the airline as well as business entities like Indigo and SpiceJet to look into several concerns that are basically emerging, particularly post-Operation Sindoor and the role that Turkey has played. Despite the hue and cry that we have essentially seen, it seems that the airlines haven't really paid much heed to what is really becoming the biggest talking point now.
Yes, Shravan, we're staying with these pictures coming here, putting out some information for our viewers. 2 Turkish planes with Turkish crew on Indian skies. Another DGCA lifeline for Turkish planes flying in India. And has the promise been forgotten? Indigo received 3rd extension from DGCA on Turkish Airlines. Going back to Shravan Sen, Shravan, now there are extension after extensions which have been given to these airlines. But like we were talking to our aviation experts, they're raising the question that we are also asking. What about national interest? After all, it's always nation first.
Well, that's something that the airlines will have to answer. And more importantly, the regulator here. The regulator has a larger role to play. The airlines cannot really continue with this agreement had it not been for the role that DGCA has played. And just look at the sequence of events here. The agreement had already lapsed in the month of May. And that's when they were essentially told, Indigo was essentially told that they cannot renew the agreement. It seems that there was a further request that was made by Indigo Airline where they largely put the onus on the regulator, saying that if at all these agreements are not renewed, they would not be in a position to carry on with the international operations to begin with, because they do not have enough aircraft or, for that matter, even crew members to carry on with the flight operations. That is exactly where the DGCA basically stepped in, and it seems that in the month of September, a one-time extension was granted to Indigo. Similar is the case for SpiceJet, where they have also been allowed to carry on with their operations, which effectively means that if you are taking a flight from certain sectors, you would essentially be not in a Indigo or a SpiceJet flight or aircraft. It would be a Corendon aircraft that you would be flying in. And not just that, you would also be flying with Turkish crew members and not Indian crew members, that too inside domestic routes. So it is important to highlight that it is essentially the entire operation thereafter is basically taken care by the Turkish Airlines. Now, what are the security ramifications here? You've had aviation experts raising their concern here, saying that anything could actually happen. If a country is supporting our enemy nation, can you really take away the fact that they could actually tamper with the route operations itself? And what are the implications of it? So these are some major cause of concerns at this stage.
That's right, Arnab. Well, thank you for getting us all those details. And viewers, remember that we'll be debating this issue